To actually cover the cookies, you need to make sure there's no flour or extra crumbs on the surface of the cookie. So I actually took a wet paper towel, just a damp paper towel, and kind of wiped them off. Seems a little weird, but sometimes the icing won't stick. So then I piped a circle of icing around the edge of the cookie, and these do not have to be perfect. And what you do when you do this is you kind of pipe the icing out and let it drop onto the surface. These don't have to be perfect because you're going to be covering them up later. So it's just to serve as like a little dam to hold in the flood icing that you made that is thinned out. And, like I said, you're going to be covering this edge up. So don't worry if it's not perfectly round. That's okay because we're going to be fixing it later. All right, and then when it comes time to fill in the flood icing, you take the thinned out icing, and you can put this in a pastry bag. A lot of people who do cookies like professionally will use pastry bags. I hate pastry bags, honestly. So I just put a little dab of the icing on there, and then I'll just spread it out with a spatula up to the edge where the little boundary is. And you can always put a little bit more icing on if it looks like it's too thin. And like on this one, I didn't put enough on it on the cookie, and you can kind of see the cookie surface through the icing. So you just put a little bit more on there and spread it out up to the edge, and the little dam will hold it in place. And you can add more if it turns out that you need to add more. That's not a problem, and just smooth it out. And the one thing you want to watch for is air bubbles that might be starting. Now, in these cookies, I have a plan to cover the entire surface, so it's not as big a deal if there's a little air bubble, but you might want to pick the cookie up and kind of tap it on the surface just to make sure that there aren't any air bubbles that form, because that can make a bump on the cookie. But it's not tremendously critical if you're going to be covering the whole surface anyway. And when you make this icing, you can put a little flavoring in it as long as there's no oil or grease in the flavoring that you're putting into the cookie. So don't use any oils, don't use any flavored oils, because that prevents the royal icing from hardening up. And what I did right there was I saw a little air bubble was forming, so I went ahead and just kind of, grabbed it with the spatula. And if you just take a look at them, you can see if there's an air bubble somewhere. See, there's one right here. So you can take the spatula or just a wet finger. And some people who do cookies professionally all the time, they have like little scribers and that kind of stuff, like a little needle. You can use a toothpick. Just break the bubble and let it form back into itself. And see, now it's a flat surface with no imperfections, which is basically what you want to work on. So once you're done with this, you can just let them, and if you drop them on the surface too, that can raise the bubbles up. But you can just let these dry, and then they'll be ready to decorate. You have to let them dry for a decent amount of time. Don't go too fast because they will be soft on the inside, even though they look dry on the outside. And you want them to be hard so that you can decorate them without ruining the icing.